Good evening and welcome to the channel's studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. The EU's climate service says for the first time global warming has exceeded 1.5 Celsius across an entire year. World leaders promised in 2015 to try to limit the long-term temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius, which is seen as crucial to help avoid the most damaging impacts. This first year-long breach doesn't break that landmark Paris Agreement, but it does bring the world closer to doing so in the long term. Scientists say urgent action to cut carbon emissions can still slow warming. The period from February 2023 to January 2024 reached 1.52 Celsius of warming according to the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service. The following graph shows how that compares with previous years. Pakistan has suspended mobile calls and data services as millions of people head to the polls to vote in a new government. An Interior Ministry spokesman said the measures were warranted, citing recent incidents of terror in the country. The election comes almost 2 years since the previous Prime Minister, cricketer turned politician Imran Khan was ousted in a no-confidence vote. Mr. Khan was jailed on corruption charges last year and is barred from standing. Three-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is now on the ballot in what many analysts say is Pakistan's least credible election yet. Meanwhile, Russia's election commission has rejected anti-war challenger Boris Nadezhkin as a candidate in next month's presidential vote. Mr. Nadezhkin has been relatively critical of Vladimir Putin's full-scale war in Ukraine, when few dissenting voices have been tolerated in Russia. Election authorities claimed more than 15% of the signatures he submitted with his candidate application were flawed. He had tried to challenge this, but the commission rejected his bid. Refusing to give up, Mr. Nadezhkin said on social media that he would challenge the decision in Russia's Supreme Court. The Central Election Commission said that of the 105,000 signatures submitted, more than 9,000 were invalid, and they cited a variety of violations. The US Secretary of State says there is still hope for peace in Gaza. That's despite Israel's rejection of Hamas's offer for a ceasefire and the return of hostages in Gaza. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met the leaders of Qatar and Egypt on Tuesday and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah on Wednesday. Antony Blinken says he believes there is still space for an agreement.
What I can tell you about these discussions is that while there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached.
Ghana's government has suppressed plans to implement a 15% tax on power following a public uproar that it will worsen the cost of living crisis. The value-added tax was to be levied on domestic consumers of electricity, but labour unions opposed the new tax and announced nationwide protests against it next week. Authorities now say the plan has been put on hold until talks are held to resolve the dispute. It comes a few days after the government started to implement a fuel emissions levy, sparking mixed reactions. And fountains of lava are spewing from a fissure in southwest Iceland in the third volcanic eruption since December. Spectacular footage from the Reykjanes Peninsula showed molten rock oozing along a fissure estimated at 3 kilometers in length. Plumes of lava shot more than 50 meters into the air, witnessed by Coast Guard helicopter flying over the peninsula earlier on Thursday morning. The nearby town of Grindavik was already evacuated during the last eruption on the 14th of January, and on Thursday guests were told to leave the popular Blue Lagoon geothermal spa because of the latest eruption. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the channel studios in Lagos.